All right. Anyway, you're all here to see the President of the Security Council for the month of September. The permanent representative of Slovenia, Ambassador Samuel Zbogar, will be here to present the program of work. The Secretary General, meanwhile, arrived in Beijing a short while ago, where he will take part in this year's summit of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, and that'll take place Thursday, so tomorrow our time. There he will highlight the importance of South-South cooperation to build solidarity and drive progress on shared development goals. While in the capital, he will also meet with senior government officials. Earlier today, he was in Shanghai, where he spoke at the opening ceremony of the workshop on artificial intelligence capacity building. He said that AI capacities are concentrated in a handful of powerful companies and even fewer countries. Meanwhile, too many countries face significant challenges in accessing AI tools. The Secretary General underscored that to truly harness AI's potential, we need international cooperation and solidarity. Somebody's got feedback here. Okay. We need cooperation, and we do not need feedback. And solidarity, and we must urgently bridge the AI gap for developing countries. Without adequate guardrails, Mr. Guterres said AI could further worsen inequalities and the digital divides and disproportionately affect the most vulnerable. Those remarks were all shared with you, and you saw over the weekend he was in Singapore, where he met with the president and the prime minister, among other officials. Turning to Gaza, I can tell you that the Secretary General has been following very closely the campaign against polio, which is now underway in the Gaza Strip. He's been moved by images of young children receiving their vaccination in the midst of rubble and utter ruin. It is clear to him that the polio pauses are a rare ray of hope and humanity in the cascades of horror that we have seen in Gaza. The Secretary General commends everyone involved in this polio vaccination campaign, especially the extraordinary humanitarians leading this effort. This coordinated action is a contrast to what Gaza has endured since the acts of terror unleashed by Hamas in Israel on October 7th, Mr. Guterres said. Gaza has become synonymous with relentless bloodshed, most recently the killing of 6 hostages, which the Secretary General utterly condemned. He said that in a tweet, much of the world has come to know more about these hostages through stories and advocacy of their loved ones. The Secretary General reiterates his call for the immediate release of all hostages and an immediate ceasefire. If the parties can act to protect children from deadly virus, he said, surely they can and must act to protect children and all innocents from the horrors of war. And just a bit more details about the vaccinations. The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that local pauses has aimed to allow us to reach more than 640,000 children under the age of 10 across the Gaza Strip. The World Health Organization's Director General, Dr. Tedros, said today that around 74,000 children are estimated to have been vaccinated yesterday, which is the second day of the campaign. This brings the total number of children vaccinated so far to over 160,000. Dr. Tedros added that day 3 of the campaign is ongoing. Aside from the local pauses, our OCHA colleagues say that Israeli bombardments, ground operations, and heavy fighting continue in multiple areas, resulting in further civilian casualties, displacements, and destruction of houses and other civilian infrastructure. As we have flagged repeatedly here, Palestinian families continue to flee and find themselves in overcrowded areas with inhumane living conditions, which, coupled with the lack of clean water, sanitation facility, basic hygiene items, contribute to the spread of diseases, polio being one of them, of course. We also want to reiterate that parties must always respect international humanitarian law. This means that civilians must be protected. Their essential needs, including food, including shelter, including water, and including health, must be met wherever they may be in Gaza. Meanwhile, our local partners, in collaboration with the UN Children's Fund, have been able to repair the main water transmission line running from Israel to Khan Yunis, which was damaged during recent military operations. This has led to the partial restoration of water services in several areas, including Al-Mawasi, which, as you know, has seen a huge concentration of Palestinians trying to flee the violence. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us the global water and sanitation, that water and sanitation, let's try this again. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that the water and sanitation situations in Gaza continues to be dire, with services and the responses hampered by ongoing destruction of water and sanitation facilities, restricted access, and limitation of entry of essential resources. With the first rainfall of the season experienced over the past weekend, our humanitarian colleagues warn that over one-third of the population in Gaza is living in flood-prone areas. Local authorities and humanitarian partners are worried that seawater flooding tents in the beach and damage to rainwater and sewage networks, resulting in additional flooding. Just today, UNICEF, along with OCHA, the UN Development Program, and other NGOs, assessed the water hygiene sanitation situation in 4 displacement sites located in flood-prone areas of Gaza. Those are in Khan Yunis and Deir al-Balah. And with this, we hope with this assessment we can help with preparations for the rainy season. Moving to the West Bank, OCHA warns that the continued use of lethal warlike tactics by Israeli forces, including airstrikes, with people being killed, injured, and displaced or deprived of access to basic services. Operations have now resumed in Tulkarem, while they're also continuing in Jenin. We've recorded more than 24 fatalities over the past week, including children. Today, multiple organizations mobilized by OCHA were set to carry out an assessment mission in Jenin, but were denied access by Israeli security forces. OCHA warns that access impediments are impacting the ability to provide meaningful humanitarian response. You will recall that the movement of ambulances and the movement of medical teams has been impeded and delayed since the onset of the now week-old military operation by Israeli forces in the West Bank. For his part, Tor Venislan, our special coordinator for the Middle East peace process, said after visiting Gaza yesterday that the scale of destruction is immense, the humanitarian needs are colossal and soaring, and civilians continue to bear the brunt of this conflict. He unequivocally condemned the horrifying civilian death toll in Gaza. During his visit, Mr. Venislan met with the heads of UN agencies and our dedicated staff who are working in extremely difficult conditions to deliver humanitarian aid. He said their commitment to bravery in providing critical support to those in need is truly commendable. He also visited a polio vaccination center and welcomed the humanitarian pauses that are allowing such vaccinations to take place. And a quick update from Lebanon. Our colleagues at the UN peacekeeping force in Lebanon have confirmed that earlier today, a contractor traveling to provide services to UNIFIL's Spanish contingent was injured by gunfire near Sarda. Peacekeepers took the individual to the hospital to receive treatment. Regrettably, this is the second such incident in as many days in which a contractor supporting UNIFIL peacekeepers has been injured by gunfire. Furthermore, yesterday, a UNIFIL vehicle carrying peacekeepers in the same area was lightly damaged when gunfire hit the ground, causing ricocheting stones to hit the vehicle. We reiterate that all relevant actors must comply with their obligations under international law, including applicable rules of international humanitarian law, and that civilians must be respected and protected, not to mention peacekeepers. The mission also continues to contact the relevant actors on both sides of the blue line in an effort to de-escalate the situation and calls for the safety and security of our personnel. And a humanitarian update from Syria, which we have not had in quite a bit. Our colleagues at OCHA tell us that in the northeast of the country, we carried out a cross-line interagency assessment mission to Al-Kisra district of Deir ez-Zor, and that is the first such mission since 2018. That mission apparently took place September 1st. The interagency team met with local communities and visited essential service points, including water, sanitation, and hygiene facilities, health facilities, and markets. Just to give you a bit of context, Al-Kisra was impacted by the recent escalation of hostilities in Deir ez-Zor, which resulted in at least 25 civilians being killed. The resurgence in hostilities, along with the closure of crossing points along the Euphrates River, has interrupted access to healthcare, water, and food, and driven up already high prices. And just a note on Yemen, where this coming Friday marks a grim milestone for human rights colleagues and for humanitarian work. 3 months ago, 6 of our human rights colleagues in Yemen were detained by the Ansar Allah Houthi de facto authorities. Their whereabouts remain unknown, and the Houthi de facto authorities have not yet permitted physical access to any of them, despite our repeated requests. Today, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, again demanded their immediate and unconditional release and the release of all human rights and humanitarian workers similarly arrested and detained without legal protection. And on Mauritania, the Acting Emergency Relief Coordinator, Joyce Masuya, has allocated $3 million from the Central Emergency Response Fund to support Malian refugees who've sought safety there. The funds will support the provision of life-saving assistance, including the health and nutrition sectors. More than 100,000 people, both Malian refugees and host communities, in the Haut-Chargui region in the east of the country. As of July 2024, this region was hosting over 260,000 displaced people, putting severe pressure on local resources and services, especially in the health sector. Mauritania has hosted a significant number of refugees from Mali, especially since 2013. Moving to Europe, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tells us that 8 organizations continue to provide emergency support to people impacted by the latest attacks across the country over the weekend. Kharkiv City in the northeast was particularly affected and sustained 2 attacks on August 30th and September 1st. That's according to the authorities, and 6 people were killed and 150 were injured, including 30 children. Our humanitarian partners on site also noted large-scale damage to civilian infrastructure. More than 90 residential buildings, a shopping center, and sports facilities, as well as 2 education facilities, were damaged by the attacks. Our humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine, Matthias Schmale, condemned the repeated attacks impacting civilian residential areas and causing multiple casualties to civilians. Aid workers in Kharkiv mobilized immediately and provided medical and psychosocial support. In the last 2 days, more than a dozen non-governmental organizations delivered repair materials and covered over 400 shattered windows. Our partners also started the registration process for cash assistance. Humanitarian colleagues say the humanitarian operations continue today. In other parts of Ukraine, notably in Sumy and Donetsk, and in Kyiv and Dnipro and Zaporizhzhia areas, also suffered from deadly strikes and attacks over the weekend and yesterday. Our colleagues in Ukraine just told us that new attacks today struck Poltava in the center of the country. Initial reports indicate a number of civilian casualties. And just to flag another vaccination campaign that is taking place in a different part of the world, UNICEF is supporting a nationwide vaccination campaign by the government of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The campaign targets more than 800,000 children and 120,000 pregnant women who have missed out on vaccines since the COVID-19 pandemic. With support from the Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, UNICEF assisted the DPRK's Ministry of Public Health with the delivery of over 4 million doses of vaccines, including measles, rubella, tetanus, diphtheria, hepatitis B, and polio. UNICEF also supplied new freezers, fridges, and other supplies to keep vaccines effective, even in the most remote areas. Additionally, 7,200 health workers were trained to manage vaccination campaigns and handle any potential vaccination reactions. UNICEF is also supporting the campaign by overseeing the vaccine delivery and administration and tracking vaccinations. A couple of senior appointments for you. Today, the Secretary General is appointing Georgette Gagnon of Canada as his new Deputy Special Representative for Political Issues for the UN Political Mission in Afghanistan, otherwise known as UNAMA. Ms. Gagnon succeeds Markus Potzel of Germany, to whom the Secretary General is grateful for his dedicated service in support of the mandate of the mission. Ms. Gagnon brings to the position more than 28 years of experience in supporting peace-building processes, leading strategic initiatives on human rights, humanitarian action, and developments in conflict and post-conflict situations. We congratulate her. Previously, she had been the Deputy Special Representative in Libya. And also new resident coordinators in Bolivia, the Dominican Republic, and Cameroon. Anna Martinen Pont of Finland began her new function as the UN resident coordinator in Bolivia. Julia Sanchez of Peru is now the resident coordinator for the Dominican Republic. And finally, Issa Sanogo of Cote d'Ivoire is the new resident and humanitarian coordinator in Cameroon. We all congratulate them. Their bios are online. Finally, new payment, new quiz. If anybody gets this one on the first try, they'll get two questions, exactly. The name of this member state is derived from the Spanish for shallow sea. Okay. It is also the home of the 190-mile-long Andros Barrier Reef, which is a massive living organism that is unique even among other barrier reefs due to its rare depth of 6,000 feet. Shallow seas. How do you say shallow seas in Spanish? Bahamar. Bahamar. So what country are we talking about? Bahamas. Oh, who said Bahamas? Okay. All right, Amelie, go ahead. Okay, all right. Maggie.
Okay. Does the Secretary General believe that countries that sign up to the Rome Statute should enforce their obligations under the Rome Statute?
Countries that sign international instruments have responsibilities to the instruments they've signed.
So is he disappointed then that Mongolia did not act on the arrest warrant for President Putin when he arrived in the country?
Look, I mean, I've stated our position. As you know, the ICC is an independent judicial institution, has a mandate distinct and separate from that of the UN. The Secretary General fully supports the court, its work, and respects its independence.
And one on Egypt and Ethiopia, the Grand Renaissance Dam. Tensions seem to be raised again recently. Egypt has written to the Security Council. Is the Secretary General concerned that tensions are rising between these two large countries?
Yes, of course, it's concerning, and we very much hope that all of the countries that depend on water from the Nile can come together in agreement and share this natural resource. Deji.
On the polio vaccine campaign, today should be the second day, as you said, right?
Yesterday
the third.
was the second.
Yesterday was the second.
Yeah.
So there's going to be an extra day in central Gaza.
There are 3 days.
But there would be another.
And then we'll need another, in case there is sadly no general ceasefire within the next 4 weeks. In the next 4 weeks, we will need another series of pauses to deliver the second half of the vaccine.
Exactly. That's what I'm going to ask. First one is, so now in central Gaza, it seems the campaign goes well, right?
It's going. Yes, we're vaccinating thousands and thousands of children. Yes.
And today, WHO just said there might be some problems to go north of Gaza. To go north of Gaza to keep this campaign. Can you share some contacts with Israel, how they react of the northern part because it's
you would have to address those questions on the operation and ability of the campaign to WHO.
Okay,
and that I would be asking them. So.
And one last thing, you just mentioned the second phase, which means 4 weeks later. Has Israel promised that they were going to have the second phase?
Let me just say, it is critical it is essential that all of these children get their second doses. And we hope that Israel and all those other involved and the Palestinian factions that are fighting agree to a pause so children can be vaccinated.
So that might be a talking point between Mr. António Guterres and the Prime Minister Netanyahu during their UNGA meeting, possible UNGA meeting, right?
I think there will be quite talking points
if they meet.
If they meet, yes. Okay. Cheryl Nichols, Reuters.
Thank you, Stefan Dujarric, UN Spokesperson's office. Just a bit of a follow-on. Given what you just said about the SG saying this is a ray of hope, the pauses in the fighting in Gaza, and it did all sort of seem to come together kind of quietly and quickly in the past month. Why do you think the UN was so successful in helping convince the parties to take part in these pauses to allow this to happen?
Look, in a sense, you have to ask those that had to be convinced. And I think that's the Secretary General's point. I mean, there was an agreement for the sake of the most vulnerable in the world, right? These children who some of them were born since 7th of October, who were born under the bombs, right? Who were born under rockets, who were born under fire, for them to have those vaccines. I mean, it is the minimum of humanity we can find. It needs to be a building block for a better path forward. Benno, and then Abdelhamid, and then Dennis.
Thank you, Steph. I want to follow up on Mongolia. I understand that the ICC is independent from the Secretary General, but I think also that was not Maggie's question. I think the question was if the SG has an opinion about if Mongolia violated their obligations to follow an arrest warrant.
I think if you rewind to, I answered Maggie. My first answer to Maggie, I think, was very clear. Whether or not the verdict of whether a member state violates a treaty, it's not a treaty to which we are a party. I think if you just read back what I answered Maggie in the first question, I think it makes our position clear. At least to me. Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Stefan. There is tension developing between Algeria and Mali on the border. Algeria intercepted a drone coming from Mali toward the Algerian border. Are you following this development?
I haven't seen the particular story of the drone, but we're very much aware of the civilians that were killed in Mali, close to the Algerian border, which I think we were very clear in condemning. It is a very volatile area in a larger volatile area, and we very much hope that the authorities, both in Algiers and in Bamako, can find a way forward to try to dial down the tension, but most importantly, find a way for civilians to be able to live in those areas without the fear of being killed.
My second question on the West Bank, Israel is about to declare that the West Bank is a confrontation front, a war front, not only tension, but a second front, as they call it. Are you...
I mean, listen, I think I was very clear in reporting what we've seen of these warlike use of Air Force jets, the number of civilians that have been killed, our inability to access areas where we need to access to assess. I think we are paying attention to what's going on in Gaza. We're also paying as much attention to what's going on in the West Bank, which seems to be heading very much in the wrong direction.
And finally, Mr. Netanyahu yesterday in his press conference, he displayed a map. It shows Gaza in a different color, and the rest is Israel. The West Bank did not show in that map. Any comment on that?
Our comment is that for us, the map of what is Israel, the map what is the occupied Palestinian territory is very clear. we have seen through the years many people in that part of the world display maps that do not match the maps that we recognize. Dennis, then Stefano.
Yesterday, U.S. seized the plane of Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro. Does UN Secretary General think that it's kind of a escalatory move and like in violation of international law?
We're aware of this. At this point, we consider this a bilateral matter between the U.S. and Venezuela. Stefano Vacara, and then I think I see
Thank you,
some
Stefan.
hair back there.
We read the reaction of from Geneva on what's happening in Venezuela.
Sorry?
In Venezuela,
Yeah.
for the warrant, arrest warrant.
Yeah.
There's been a reaction from Geneva. What is the exact?
What do you mean there's been a reaction from Geneva?
I mean, there is a condemnation of the situation of fear
By whom?
by the Human Rights Office in Geneva.
Okay.
And what is the instead?
Well, we fully support what our human rights colleagues have said. As we've been following this situation very closely, including the arrest warrant against Edmundo Gonzalez. We reiterate our call for the full protection of human rights in Venezuela. Ibtisam.
Thank you, Steph. Follow up on your answer regarding the map. I mean, you said that many people display maps that you don't agree with, but Mr. Netanyahu is not just a private citizen. He is a head of government. So a map that he display has a meaning. And the map that he displayed also here last September.
It's not the first time he's shown such a map, including, you're right, he did show one here last September.
Don't you think that this needs to be condemned, given the fact that it goes against your own resolution, UN resolutions, that when he shows such a map, it shows that...
Let me put it this way. I think our position is clear. Our map is clear. The display of such maps, I think, is not a good sign and is not particularly helpful. Michelle.
Steph, when can we expect the announcement of a new UN aid chief to replace Martin Griffiths?
When can you expect it? Yeah.
I mean, like this week?
I-
Next week? Is it on the cards?
I would not expect it today. How about that?
Tomorrow? Next week?
I would not expect it today. I mean, all joking aside, I get the signal of the white smoke just a few minutes before you do. So, yes, I'm sorry I cut you off.
No worries. I have another question about a different subject, and that's the comments that Vice President and candidate for the U.S. presidency made during an interview with CNN regarding fracking. Do you have any comments on that?
I'm going to try not to insert myself into the U.S. political campaign, and I think I answered Benno in a way that our focus is on what political leaders do once they're in power, or what they don't do once they're in power, and being very clear on our criticism or support of policies which either go for, that help us in combating climate change or don't. We're not going to start commenting on what people say when they're running for office. Abdelhamid.
Going back to Thor Winston's statement, he condemned the killing of 6 hostages, of course.
I think he condemned the killings of all civilians in Gaza. That's what I read.
But he also condemned the killing of the hostages, according
yes,
to
who seem to be summarily executed, yes.
So we don't know that, but he said that. The killing of Palestinians in the West Bank, especially in Jenin and that area, I didn't see any condemnation, including killing an 82-year-old and having an Israeli vehicle pass over his body. Such incident, such gruesome act. Why it's not condemned by
I did
Thor
not
Winston?
see this particular incident, but I can tell you we have been, from this podium, you could do your research, we have condemned very clearly the killings of civilians by Israeli security forces. Deji,
One last thing.
one more thing. No, one more thing. Don't ever say one last.
All right. Hopefully, it's one last thing.
Yeah.
Mr. Torben Islam visited Gaza and said he's appalled by what he has seen. But Kogat released this video of Deir al-Balah on 26th. This is a market.
Yeah,
it seems. If that's what this is not definitely what Mr. Torben Islam saw.
I don't know the provenance of that video. I don't know the veracity of that.
Said market scene in Deir al-Balah, central Gaza, yesterday, August 25th.
I cannot judge the veracity of that video. I can only judge the veracity of what we see with our own eyes. I think to deny that there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, to deny that there is a food crisis in Gaza, to deny that there's a health crisis in Gaza is pretty ridiculous, to say the least. On that note, adios.